Ask the girl next to you, would you help me with my do?
Hello, puppy. Hi, sweetie.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, puppy.
We need a new star of the show.
Sweetie, we've had dogs in our sessions before.
We're ready.
We've had dogs in our sessions before.
Ready?
So it won't be the first time.
5, 4, 3.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Don Zavis, National Sales Trainer and Sales Coach. I want to welcome you to our Friday session. As you can see, a different background. We are back in our Catalyst training facility for our first inaugural dry run to see if we can pull this thing off still. So thank you for being here. So those that are joining us on Facebook Live, thank you very much. For those that are joining us on YouTube Live, thank you very much. For those that are joining us on Zoom Live, thank you very much. And for those that are ultimately going to be seeing this on our Vimeo archive, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We realize that nowadays there's lots of things vying for your attention, and the contribution you're making to your sales education will come back to you many times over.
Shout out here to the Catalyst Makerspace. That's our new home for hopefully a very long time.
Yep.
And it is in the Tucson Mall. It is Suite 110, and Catalyst Makerspace is brought to you by SACA, which is the Southern Arizona Arts and Cultural Alliance. So shout out to them for allowing us to be a part of their deal. They've got arts and crafts spaces here. They've got robotics and engineering. They have culinary here. They have music. They have Photoshop here in terms of a photo wing of the studio. They've got offices that you can actually utilize. So shout out to Catalyst in the Tucson Mall.
Yes, absolutely. So, John, for today's sales current events, I almost don't know where to start because, even though we've been doing these and we took a hiatus, through the month of April, so now we're coming after a month, and I really thought when we came back after that month hiatus now to our new training facility, I was going to say, all the stuff we talked about before, yeah, that's all fixed. Gas has gone down, this has gone down, flights have gone down, the world's kind of righting itself, and now we can trudge forward unencumbered. That ain't the case.
So what are you presenting today?
Well, I'm presenting incumbents. And I think that this is, although this is actually the one that is scheduled for today, so our curriculum, my curriculum, is based, it's structured. I know what I'm going to be doing in November and December of this year. This particular session, although it was scheduled for this time frame, is absolutely appropriate now because we hear a lot of talk about recession. And if you look at global economic indicators, 2 quarters of negative GNP. So that means if the economy is not growing, if it's actually receding, that indicates a recession. Now we've had that. Now nobody's used the word recession yet, but those both happen. If it happens one more quarter, which is likely to happen, no one's going to be able to avoid it. Now, we in the sales world, nobody cares about that. We're still expected to perform. For those that are on some kind of commission, we eat what we kill. That's it. I mean, so we have to put, we have to put food on the table. For those that have a quota, they're working for an organization. You can't go to your boss and say, you know what, blah-bitty, 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 so that's not going to happen, so don't expect very much from me. There's a good chance you're not going to be around for a while. So this is a very appropriate session on incumbents because we're really going to focus on not only an incumbent where somebody actually is working with someone who does what you do, but more than 50% of the session is going to be how do you deal with someone who's never worked with someone like you. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, right now, 1/3 of everything that people generally buy is things that they may have never had before, they've never bought before, especially now in our post-COVID world. I'll give you some great examples about that. So.
Well, what I'm going to do is tee the ball up for you then. Mm-hmm. Initially here to finalize our intro discussion, I will be dealing with a subject matter that I find very, very intriguing to me, and that is the 8 common mistakes that we all as salespeople make during sales presentations, sales meetings, or whatever. It's a recursion exercise that we have to always remind ourselves because the blocking and tackling is fundamental. I've said the analogy before. Even though you make 90% of your free throws, the first thing you do in practice in basketball is to practice more free throws.
Absolutely.
Even though you absolutely make an unusually large percentage of your 3-point shots, the thing you have to do is you can't just assume that it's going to come back to you the next game. You just got to keep plugging and keep plugging. And that's in a different same exercise, but in a different environment, and that's what we call recursion. So we're going to get into some of the mistakes that we currently make. Hello, Mitch. And we're going to get into some of the mistakes that we continually make. But first of all, I want to talk about discomfort, because part of being in sales is being uncomfortable with so many of the activities that salespeople need to do. And the reason that a lot of these activities in salespeople don't get done is because they are uncomfortable doing them. So to start it off, though, it's going to be a little bit of a long trail to get there. We're going to talk about an article that I read this morning on some weekly Friday morning thing by Robert Glazer, and he brings to this discomfort to the forefront a little bit. But he does it through a different angle. He was recently had a business meeting with a colleague, and the colleague was telling him that he had to go to his orientation of kindergarten for his kid. And one of the primary parameters of the things that you do in kindergarten in this particular school was no nuts allowed. You could bring all kinds of snacks and drinks and stuff like that as your little personal package. No nuts. No offense. No nuts. And so he asked why, and the standard line was because we are very concerned that there might be somebody in our kindergarten population that's allergic to nuts. Okay, specifically peanuts, but we'll just use nuts because I have lineage in my family that are allergic to walnuts, some allergic to other types of nuts, celiac disease ramifications, things along those lines. Regardless. So he was a little unnerved with that policy because he said, you know, well, how are these little bodies going to evolve and deal with their allergy if they're never exposed to it? If we just pretend that this doesn't exist by not bringing nuts into the classroom. And you can also advance that to the airplane because airlines no longer have peanuts all along. But basically, so he cited a study that took 600 people, kids, and they put them into two cohorts. One was exposed to a no-nut policy in the classroom. The other was exposed to, you know, not forcibly nuts in the classroom, but it wasn't enforced. And at the end of the day, the cohort that was never exposed to nuts in the classroom had 5 times more the allergy diagnoses than the kids that were exposed to nuts at an early age, and their bodies actually dealt with the allergy and the issue, just like every other virus, every other germ, every other thing that we grew up with, and our bodies overcame that. So where we jump to now in terms of sales training is there was a cohort there, a management team cohort that didn't want to deal with the uncomfortable nature of exposing kids to something that they thought could happen, versus the other cohort that addressed the issue head on. We're not going to do any preventive policies, and as a result, their cohort was 5 times less likely to turn up an allergy. So when we come up to sales training and the sales profession, the point really is you have to embrace the discomfort. You have to embrace the attitude that I know I don't like this, cold calls make me uncomfortable, networking in big groups of people make me uncomfortable, so as a result, I choose to not do it. But then when it comes to your sales success, not dealing with your discomfort is a real big problematic situation for you. And so one of the things that we do in Don Zavis sales training is we help you deal with the discomfort.
That was great. And by the way, I'll add a couple things to it. You know, sales is hard. I think we all agree with that. You know, you're frequently alone, you're frequently talking to someone who, even if your stuff was free, in fact, they want it to be free and they want you to pay them for it. So somebody, you know, you're going to reach a situation where somebody is not happy. And so many people are uncomfortable about that. You mentioned cold calls, you know, or going to networking events. Here's one of the things, investing in themselves. I tell people all the time, your only true investment is you. Now I will make a pitch for Cody here. You know, obviously John and I can teach you how to make more money. What we do not teach you to do is how to keep it. You need a responsible financial relationship with an appropriate person. That being said though, most people won't invest in themselves. They know that they need to do this, you know, go to things, travel, whatever it is, but they're so fiscally suspicious that you're right, it may pan out bad, right? You put a $1,000 ad in the paper, you hope it gets 1,000 people call you. It might, but it might not. And because of the might not, a lot of people never do it because there's no guarantees. And we don't live in a world of any guarantees. We often say you can't change the past, there's no guarantee of it tomorrow. The only influence you truly have is on the present today. So I think that is absolutely perfect.
All right.
Absolutely perfect. So thank you, sir. I will leave the stage to you and wander up back here momentarily.
All right. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I wanted to do today was talk about some common mistakes that we continue to make. They're very easy mistakes to do. And usually the mistakes happen because of a lack of preparation for a sales activity, a sales presentation. And the reason that this comes to mind is I've done this session before. It's been a long time, 9 months maybe. But the distinction is I just always get reminded. I was, for lack of a better word, exposed to a sales presentation the other day, and it was a group presentation, and that's fine. There's nothing good, bad, right, or wrong with any of that. But it had a lot of fundamental mistakes in it. So I decided at that point in time, it's time to dust off this particular session and remind all of us that we do, when we don't practice our blocking and tackling on a daily or weekly basis, we continue to dilute some of the things we've done well in the past. And I used the basketball three-point percentage as an example earlier, as well as free throw percentage. And it doesn't really matter how many times you block the person in football. You've got to continue practicing your blocking as long as you're going to play at a high level. So we're going to talk about the 8 common mistakes we all make in sales presentations, sales meetings, and or even one-on-one sales conversations. Number one, especially when it comes to a presentation or meeting, number one is not understanding your explicit objective or purpose for the meeting. Now, it is very rare where you meet somebody and you sit down and you have a conversation and all of a sudden you're going through that sales funnel so fast and you're going to close out within 30 minutes sitting at Denny's or Starbucks or wherever. That's very rare. In fact, that's highly, highly unusual. So you have to also understand that part of building that relationship with your qualified prospect is about understanding where in the sales funnel that particular meeting sits. So there are all kinds of different objectives of a presentation or a sales meeting. First and foremost, rapport building. If you're just getting started in a situation, you're going to have 7, 8, 10 touches with this relationship before you get it closed, right? And so if you know that, you've got to understand where are you at in the process. So you've got objectives of rapport building. Another objective that's going to be totally different and it's gonna have a different agenda, and the way you conduct yourself in that meeting would be, establishing your subject matter expertise. Mitch is a subject matter expert in roofing. Sam is in food and product development. Cody is in wealth development and retirement and financial education and things along those lines. So everybody you deal with is going to have you're going to have a different set of objectives for every meeting that you have with that person. It could be that you want to meet to advance the product or service education of the prospect with what you do, or maybe vice versa. Your first thing is to learn more about what their challenges are, what their strategies are currently engaged in, and how are their tactics resulting in their efforts. So the objective of the meeting is really, really important. And you could be explaining your pricing. You could be actually a closing meeting. It's okay. We've just had these 7, 8 touches. Now it's time to close. So you close. And then, or on the flip side, you've already closed, and now you want to follow up. How was our service? How was our delivery? Did we live up to expectations? So often, a major mistake that is done by a person in terms of a sales meeting or a sales presentation is they do not identify, or they lose track of in the middle of the meeting, the single purpose or the objective of that particular meeting or presentation. So that's number one, understanding your objective. What are you trying to get done in this particular meeting? Because you're not going to have 3, 4, 5 hours, right? You're going to have 15 minutes, 30 minutes, something along those lines. You're going to be very time constrained, and it's very important to not lose sight of your objective for that meeting. The second mistake that a lot of us make is we make no attempts to understand the buyer or the prospect from a business profile, from a personality profile, from a behavior profile. We don't really go into a meeting with the objective of deciding, is this person a detail-oriented person? Is this person an extrovert or an analytic? Is this person fast-paced or patient? Does this person want numbers or backstory? We have to educate ourselves as salespeople to be able to identify what these nuances of our prospect or a buyer are all about. Now, we can't have them, as you know, we believe wholeheartedly in the predictive index behavioral assessment process. You don't have that capability in dealing with a prospect. But if you know enough about the psychology of people and the psychology of the sales process, you can pick up on certain tendencies that the buyer exposes to you or relates to you in somehow. You can drill down to see how much family is a part of their world, how much religion, for example, is a part of their world, how much sports is a part of their world. Look at their office all around them. See what kind of pictures and certificates and things like that are available. Absorb it, make a note of it, try to identify the buyer profile, and that will allow you to basically contour your presentation and your language towards the buyer so that you can build just a better, more long-lasting relationship. So, making no attempt to understand your buyer's profile is really a problem that you need to avoid. And that really goes back to the predictive index style that we were talking about, where we measure the dominance, extroversion, patience, and structure of the human brain. And it's a data-driven profile. So once you understand that, once we teach you the nuances of dominance, extroversion, patience, and structure, then you now have the tools to recognize those behaviors and those drives in in wherever you're talking about. Could be a buyer, could be a spouse, could be a child, could be an aunt or uncle or a father or a mother, doesn't really matter. Once you know the fundamentals, they can be recognizable. And that's a mistake that a lot of us don't do, is we don't really draw upon that resource to help us in our sales process. Another thing that we make the mistake of is we neglect to align our meeting agenda with the agenda of that particular person. So one of the things that you want to do in a presentation and a sales meeting is make sure that your two agendas are aligned. We talked a little earlier about getting the objective straight, that you understand what you're trying to get out of. But now we have to focus on what is your companion trying to get out of the conversation. What does your buyer want out of the conversation? And I know, Cody, we talked about this last time. We talked about the verbal agenda, right? You go into a meeting, and after some of the introductory niceties are about, and you start to get down to business, you announce, I want to talk about the agenda that we're trying to accomplish. You just say the words. They're not fearful words. They're not scary words. You just say it. Okay, I want to make sure that both of our agendas are covered here. So this is one of the reasons I'm here, sitting here talking with you. I want to talk about this aspect, that aspect, and a third aspect, A, B, and C. And then once that is relatively announced and understood and just kind of like in the open, then the thing to do is to make sure that the person that you're meeting with either agrees with that agenda or wants to add to that agenda. So the reality is, you just ask the question. I've just stated what I want to try and get done here today. Is there anything else in your world that you want to address in this session? You know, and then they'll say, no, they may say, no, that handles it. You've got it nailed. Or they may say, well, I want to know a little bit more about, you know, your warranty. I want to know a little bit more about the materials that you use in my solution set that you're proposing, or whatever it is. And so then before we get into the meat of the meeting, no pun intended, but what we need to do is make sure you have to restate then the verbal agenda. Okay, I am going to make sure that we cover this, this, and this on my side, and we're going to then make sure that we cover this, that, and that on your side. Is that a fair assessment? Did I rephrase that okay? Is that what you were trying to get to? And then they'll say yes or no or tweak it, and you'll just use that process through the verbal agenda to make sure that before you get into the nitty-gritty, you all know, you both know, or if it's in a group meeting, everybody understands. Their message will be heard, their questions will be answered, and that so often is something that gets forgotten because we just get too entrenched in going from A to C. We go from A, the niceties, the introductions, the handshakes, you know, and all that, and then we go straight to the heart of the matter that you think you need. In between that is the verbal agenda process that says, okay, let's get on the same page and make sure that we stay there. And then once you do that, you recalibrate the agenda, and then you take notes during it so you don't screw it up, and you process each agenda item as revised accordingly. And so number 3, aligning the prospect's agenda with your agenda, very important. Very important, because when it really comes down to it, sales processes are not that indifferent to all processes. You want to be the most productive, the most time efficient, the most measurable, the most articulate, the most productive you can be. And so that's why a verbal agenda is critical. Number 4, not establishing a listening environment. So many salespeople, so many people that believe so much in themselves that they end up talking rather than listening. They end up spilling their guts on how good their service is, how great their delivery is, how bad their competitors are, how we don't understand why there's even a decision here. They just start evoking their message and trying to just keep talking and talking and talking, not letting the prospect even catch their breath. Whereas the real need is to stop trying to overtake the conversation. And I think I just misspoke, because you're probably not trying to take over the conversation, you're just doing it. You're oblivious to the fact that you are overtaking the conversation. So one of the things that you need to do, and we highly recommend this you prepare divergent questions that make the prospect think first and talk afterwards. And you just button up after the question, let the person think, let the person respond, but ask them questions that are not convergent questions. In other words, black and white, yes, no type of answers. You want to create questions that provoke thought, that establish conversational foundations, and that you can come around and just absolutely be very introspective and allow that person just to take over the conversation. The rule of thumb is, the other person needs to talk 70% of the time, we need to talk 30% of the time as a salesperson. And as a salesperson, that's plenty of time to get the message across that you need to get across. But let them have the floor. Let them have the meeting stage. Get them going. Get them talking about themselves, their company, their services, what they, as Sam said earlier today, their why. Get to know their why. And so it's one of those situations whereby you want to make sure that not only do you create a listening environment, but you make sure you take notes. Because taking notes is a conveyance that you're interested in what that person is saying. And it doesn't do anybody any harm to ask, do you mind if I take notes? And the person will go, well, sure, take notes, that's fine. But what that does, just that statement, that sends a message to the other side of the table, not that we're adversaries, but it sends a message to the other person that, hey, we're interested in what you have to say. We're so interested in what you have to say, not only are we going to take notes, but we're going to ask permission to take notes. And then a lot of times you want to anchor your listening. So you spit it back to the person that's just giving you 70% of the conversation. And so you do little techniques like, well, if I heard you right, or to paraphrase, or just to make sure I understand. And then you spit back to that person exactly what that person just told you, and to make sure that you get the affirmative nod. Yeah, you got it. That's what I was talking about. That's what I was really working for. So number 4 is basically establish. We lose sight of the need to establish a listening environment, and based upon our excitement or our desire to close, or maybe we're time crunched and we want to move on, we just start doing some things that really don't create a listening environment, and that's something that we have to be aware of and make sure that we don't do. Number 5, not thinking through the potential objections when preparing. At the end of the day, there's hundreds and hundreds of objections that can come to fruition. But really, you can categorize them in about 10 to 15 different areas. You're going to have pricing objections. You're going to have warranty objections. You're going to have delivery objections. You're going to have a variety of follow-up service-related objections. You know, there's a very manageable number if you understand that. So often, we are so engaged in a successful outcome that we don't stop the presses ahead of time and think through some of the objections that we can anticipate and that we should anticipate. So typically it's a very short list. We need to prepare a short narrative to combat every objection that person can throw at us. You know, I love my vendor that I currently have. You know, well, you know, is there anything about anything what that vendor does that you've ever had a furrowed brow over? Has there been any really mistake or any really lack of service that I know it's your best vendor, I know you love the people, you've been with them for years, but is there anything that they've ever done that has kind of set you the wrong way? You can penetrate that. You can do that and figure that thing out and manage your conversation around that particular weakness in that particular vendor as a hypothetical example. So you need to understand what objections are going to come to us and what objections we can actually deal with. And you get that done through so many of these situations. You get that done through preparation and making sure you understand all the things that person can throw at you once you absolutely get there. Number 6 is not relating to the mood or the pace of the meeting. Typically, sales meetings or sales presentations, either or, they're time constrained. You've got 30 minutes to do what you do. You've got a 10-minute presentation. You know, we at the Sands Club, for example, we have a member spotlight that's 15 minutes, right? You know, so often, many of the presenters aren't in, even though they know that their 15-minute presentation is a hard stop. You know, they know that they don't pay attention to that, and they understand that they're going to turn some people off because everybody knows the hard stop. And when you don't acknowledge the hard stop, then all of a sudden your favorable impression starts to whinge a little bit, and so you've got to understand the pace of the meeting. So if we go back to the verbal agenda and say we've got a 30-minute meeting and we've got say 5 minutes, 5 items on the agenda, and they're all pretty much, you know, similar types of conversations, and you just do the math. After you get into the meeting and you get your little niceties out of the way, that gives you 4 minutes per agenda item or 5 minutes per agenda item. You have to be aware of that. You have to understand the mood and the pace of the meeting. If the meeting starts to a lot of salespeople have a cognitive, I don't want to use the word disorder, but they are so into what they're selling and what they do and their own process, they forget about, they lose track of the mood of the meeting. You know, is it upbeat? Is it downbeat? Is it on time? Is it way ahead of schedule? You don't want to leave any time on the clock. If the guy's going to give you half an hour, you want to, you want to use it, if you can, because that helps you build your bonding and rapport. That helps you educate yourself to their concerns. And so you've got to make sure that you understand the mood and the pace of the meeting so that you're not outpacing yourself and you're using all the time that's allotted for the benefit of knowledge exchange and developing your subject matter expertise. Number 7 out of 8 is not delineating the next steps for both parties, including the next meeting. So, when you've gone through your verbal agenda and you've done all the stuff and you stayed away from all the stuff we've been talking about, and you've had this perfect session, then one of the worst things you could do is exit the meeting without delineated next steps. And the best time in the world to get a new meeting scheduled is when you're right there, face to face with that prospect or buyer. Because once you leave that building, and once you go back to emails, and once you go back to phone calls that go to voicemail, once you do all of that stuff, all of a sudden that meeting, getting that meeting calendarized is going to be ridiculously difficult for you. I can't tell you in my youth how many times we made that mistake. It was ridiculous. So you want to end the meeting with a general summary of what we just agreed upon. And you want to know where we go from here. You want to know what are the follow-up steps. So you want to make sure that you remind yourself and your meeting participant, this is what we just agreed to. This is our verbal agenda, and we agreed you were going to send me your sales history for the last, or your purchase history for the last 12 months, for example. We agreed that I was going to send you testimonials from people in other locations that love our stuff. And whatever that list is, I'm going to send you more electronic files. I'm going to send you more paper brochures. I'm going to send you a Zoom link for your assistant to join us in the next situation or in the next session. So whatever that is, that needs to be absolutely communicated and written down and announced before you leave your chair. And so often, we're running out of time, we're a little bit of a rush, the buyer wants to bail out on us because he's looking at his watch because we didn't understand the mood and the pace of the meeting. He's looking at his watch, he wants you out of there because he's got a meeting with a boss of some sort. Regardless of the situation, you want to make sure you don't leave that meeting until you both agree on the next steps, what each of your commitments are going to be for that particular process, that sales process that you're going to be continuing, and you definitely want to make sure you get out of there with another meeting penciled in, and you can then go back to your computer and send an electronic invitation to accept, or make sure he writes it on his day planner, as do you when you're taking your notes, things along those lines. So not delineating the next steps is a critical mistake that we have to avoid. Once that meeting is over, and we've identified those next steps that have to happen, the worst thing that you can do is not follow up. That's number 8. Not following through with the agreed next steps. That does happen more often than you would ever believe. It's just a situation that is simply occurs very, very often. And follow-up, even though it's not part of this meeting, follow-up, we talk about it in 100 different genres. We talk about not following up on a 5-minute networking conversation in a crowd of 30 people. If you get a business card and you engage somebody for the first time, follow-up is critical. What you do is you make sure you scribe their business card into your electronic system or whatever system you have. You reach out to that person via email or phone, preferably phone. You try to schedule something like a breakfast or a lunch or just a coffee. You go, you look up that person on LinkedIn and Facebook, and you connect and be friends with that person. So those types of follow-ups are very, very important. But getting back to a sales meeting or a sales presentation, once you've identified what you've agreed upon, and both sides know what their commitments need to be in the timeline that you've agreed to. Like, we're gonna meet again in 2 weeks. I will get you all of this data by the end of the first week in advance of the meeting. And you're gonna agree to those timelines, you're gonna agree to your SMART goals to make sure that they are specific, and they are measurable, and they are relevant, and so in addition to, applicable and time-driven. So once you get all of those things documented and accounted for, you've got to make sure that once you leave that meeting, you follow that thing up. So those, in a nutshell, are the 8 things that really happen very often in a sales process that we always need to keep reminding ourselves that we don't want to do that. So in summary, we want to make sure that we understand the objective of the meeting and that we don't stray from that. We don't try to get too much done in too short a time, because you're going to lose track of the situation, you're going to lose the attention of the buyer. You want to make sure that you understand the type of buyer's personality that it is, understanding the buyer profile. So your knowledge of dominance, extroversion, patience, and structure is critically important. So once you know that, and we'll be happy to teach that to you, once you know that, you'll be able to recognize where those people sit in terms of those parameters. You want to make sure that that you create your verbal agenda and that it's a participatory process. In other words, you give the other people in the room the ability to add or revise the agenda, and then you agree totally before you get into the nitty-gritty, you get into the meat of the process, you understand exactly what everybody wants to get done. Establishing a listening environment. Don't be an over-talker. Make sure that the person knows that you're a listener, that you are a person that is interested in their problem, interested in their challenge, and you make sure that you listen very attentively and take good notes. You want to make sure that you prepare for all objections, so that even though you probably know my competitor is going to be beating me on price, my competitor is going to have service issues that my company cannot do, so you're going to have narratives to respond to those types of things that you can probably anticipate. And then number 6, not understanding the mood and the pace of the meeting. Meetings are basically time-driven things usually, except if they're casual. But typically in a formal business setting, you got to understand the pace. You don't want to outpace the meeting, but you don't want to slow the meeting down and not accomplish your agenda. So you want to make sure that you stay on point and stay on time. And then basically, you got to make sure that you document all the next steps, all the commitments that were made, and follow up with a full summary, a meeting summary via email or whatever your vehicle of choice is when it comes to communicating with that particular person. You got to make sure that you document all that, including the timelines, and commit. If you owe people reports, information, links, whatever, you got to make sure that you do that as you commit. And then, last but not least, make sure you follow up. Don't ever let that follow up, because once the follow up actually skips by, you're probably toast, because that you just conveyed the message that even though it looked like you cared, probably really didn't, because you didn't follow up. Anyway, those are the eight things that we always have to remind ourselves, that we always find ourselves guilty to do, and that's my story, and I'll stick it to it.
Well, if you got to have a story you stick to, that's a really, really good story. By the way, you know what I always love? I love checklists. I'm not a smart guy. My wife will tell you that. And most people, it's surprising how much they know about what they do. But I will tell you, and thank you, John, that was a great session, that how many times we forget we're talking to an entirely different person who doesn't know what we know, who doesn't understand what we know. So today my session is going to be on incumbents. And for those that don't necessarily understand what an incumbent is, It's basically someone who has sold to your prospect previously, right? Maybe you sell cars and they bought a car from somebody else. That's an incumbent. Now, everybody in the world, when you talk about incumbents, falls into one of two categories. So I'm going to say write this down. So when you hear write this down, all right? So everyone in the world, in dealing with incumbent, falls into one of two categories. They have or they have not purchased your products or services. So the entire world is divided into one of those two categories. They either have purchased what you sell in the past, or they have not. Now here's an interesting thing. When they start looking at that, so many things in your life you've never bought before, right? For example, I have a new grandchild that's going to be coming. My wife and daughter are convinced it's a girl. We are now buying girl, and they're convinced, right? Now we're buying little baby girl clothes, right? Now, my daughter's 32 years old. We haven't bought little baby girl clothes for a long, long, long time. However, we are now buying potentially little baby girls' clothes exactly the way we did 32 years ago. Why? Because it was an incumbent. We've done a version of this in the past. So everybody in the world falls in one of two categories: either have purchased your product or they have not purchased your product. So let's start with the have not. They have never purchased your product before. So the mistake many people make is they think that if they use a lot of words and they try to sell them and talk around in these big giant circles, that in some way, shape, or form, they're going to convince someone to buy something that that person hasn't decided they even want to buy. So if you're talking, so I'm going to play with someone in the room because it's good, and Cody, it's going to be you, if you don't mind. All right? Cody is a financial planner for Northwestern Mutual. So I don't know if you caught that, right? We're a great company, by the way. The world is either broken in the financial planning world, one of these two categories. Either A, have worked with a financial planner in the past, or B, have not worked with a financial planner in the past. Now, the interesting thing that most people don't realize is when we're talking about an incumbent could potentially be no one. So if you think about it, let that kind of drift into you for a second. The incumbent could be no one or nothing. So if you have a husband and wife or an individual that's been doing all their financial work and strategies and investing on their own, the incumbent is nothing. Working with no one is the incumbent, right? Roofing. The guy's never brought in a roofer before. When he has a problem, he goes up there with that little stuff you see on TV, that spray stuff. What do they call it? That seal stuff?
Flex Seal.
Flex Seal, right? He's like, honey, we don't need to spend $5,000. I got a $10 can. Shh, it's all over the roof, right? When the planes drive by, we're like, what the hell is that guy writing on his roof? Right? Because again, the incumbent in that situation is no one. Right? They never hired a roofer. The incumbent in this situation is this DIY guy, do-it-yourselfer. So everyone in the world falls into one of two things, regardless of what you are. Startup business, existing business, brand new tech, doesn't make any difference. You fall into one of two categories. They either have done business with someone like you in the past, or they have not. Let's start with the have not. Before you can get them to marry you, even psychologically, we have to help them divorce whatever their existing process is. So in the case of financial planning, before we can get them to marry us, which means take us on as their financial planner, we have to get them to mentally divorce the idea that doing it themselves is the best way for them. Before we can get them to hire our company to provide a much more capable and competent and appropriate roof, we have to get them to divorce the idea that doing it themselves is a better way for them. Now, you're never going to show them how wonderful you are and therefore it's going to change their mind. That's never going to happen, right? You could blow smoke to them 10 ways a Sunday. You could talk about your experience, your everything. It doesn't make any difference. People buy for their own reasons. The problem being is most weak salespeople don't ask them their reasons, even though when I ask people, they tell me, right? Go figure. So if they've never done, right, we're talking about the have-nots. If they've never worked with a financial planner before, so Mr. and Mrs. Jones, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would have to hear in order to determine if, in fact, doing business with a financial planner might make sense to you? right? And I'm not a smart guy. I ask good questions, but I'm not a smart guy. And interestingly enough, you know when you ask somebody that kind of question, do you know what they tell you? The answer. The answer, right? You go into a grocery store. You have what looks to be amazing pecans, right? And I'm a big pecan fan, by the way, so I'm going to wolf that. That thing is not going to survive this room when we get done. But if you walk into a grocery store and you say, oh my God, Mr. Grocer, I have the most amazing pecans and they're great and I was going to say big and juicy, but I guess you don't like your pecans juicy. They're big and they're tasty and they're organic and they're blah, 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 blah. The problem being is there's a very good chance that the guy who was in front of you said the same thing about his pecans. And his pecans are 10% less than yours. So, Mr. Jones, you've been buying pecans for a long, long time. What would have to happen for you to decide to take a look at another pecan provider? Now, I haven't told him how good my pecans are, because that doesn't make any difference at this point. The only thing that makes any difference at this point is Mr. Jones making a decision that his existing pecans, for whatever reason, that relationship could be improved on. So, Mr. Jones, Mr. Grocer, if you were thinking about making a change with your pecan provider, what would be the types of things that would have to happen for you to consider making that change? And amazingly enough, you know, when you ask that question, what people do? They tell you. They tell you. Because I'm not trying to sell you. I don't even know if my great pecans are even worthwhile for you. And here's what Mr. Jones is going to say. Well, Don, it would have to be A, B, and C. And by the way, A, B, and C, you can put anything in. They could be less expensive. They could be locally sourced, right? You could use all local labor, because I want to give back to the community. You could be part of a multi-billion-dollar organization. Whatever it is, because I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about them. And what is their favorite topic? Themselves. And if you have any question about that, look at Facebook. If you have any question about people's favorite topic, look at Facebook. My daughter was born in 1989. If somebody took a picture of my daughter out on the street, I would have wrestled that guy to the ground and kicked their ass. Why? Because you would have thought that they were some kind of pedophile, some kind of freak. A mere 30 years later, the things that people would have gone to blows for, now you put 9,000 pictures of your kids in front of the whole world. People's favorite topic is themselves. And given the opportunity to talk about themselves, you know what they will do? Gladly talk about themselves. So, Mr. Jones, you've never worked with a financial planner before, and I get the sense, based on what you've told me, that you and Mrs. Jones have done a really good job taking care of it yourself. But can I ask you a couple of questions? Because I don't know if I can help you, but I'm happy to try. Can I ask you a couple of questions? What kind of things would you need to see or hear to determine if, in fact, moving to a financial planner relationship makes sense? And you know what Mr. Jones is going to do? Mr. Jones is going to tell you. He's going to say, well, last year I got 6%. So if you could show me how I could potentially get more, well, I would have something to talk about. Last year I paid 13% in taxes. If there was a way that you showed me that I could have less than 13%, we'd have something to talk about. Last year, during COVID, lost money, you get to pick whatever it is. But they're telling you what it is that you'll need to do to close them. Now, interestingly enough, if somebody said, well, to buy your great pecans, I would have to know this, this, and this, you're a smart guy, Sam, right? What would you talk to him about? I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, right? Right. But if he said, in order to buy your pecans, I want to know about this, this, and this, what would you, being a smart guy, like to talk about? This, this, and this, right? We're not going to talk about something else. We're not going to tell them, that it's because it doesn't make any difference. Why? Because they only care about themselves. So if they've never done business with somebody like you before, your entire initial effort is a complete and thorough understanding of what would need to take place for them to do business with you, right? Because if you're trying to sell something to them that they don't want, they don't care about, all you're going to do is irritate them, right? John's point was perfect. You talk about something that they won't like, it's not going to take long for them to be looking at your watch, and next thing you know, that whatever that meeting, fruitful though it could have potentially been, goes nowhere. I talk to that people all the time when people call me about sales training. You know what I say? why do you want to pay me a boatload of money in sales training? Right? Why don't you just go get some books? I don't watch Tom Hopkins or any one of the guys on YouTube that's for free. You know what they say? Well, we already did that. And you know what I say?
How'd that work out?
Exactly. I was waiting for somebody to say, how'd that work out for you? And here's what they're going to say. Well, not very well. And I'm going to say, well, how are you hoping I can help you? And they're going to say, well, we need to know how to sell better. I'm going to say, it's going to be expensive. Right? Everybody else is like, oh, I would never say that. And it's going to be expensive. Why? Because you know what's cheaper? Doing what you're doing now. It doesn't work. It is what it is. So, the half of the world that is the have-nots. These are the people that have never done business with you before. Write this down. Have-nots. Give them, so Mr. and Mrs. Jones, what are the 2 or 3 things you're going to have to see or hear to determine whether or not it makes sense to bring in a professional roofer? Why? Because we know it's going to be more expensive than doing nothing. We know it's going to be more expensive than getting the spray can of Flex Seal, right? Although it's pretty expensive. I bought one, it was like 15 bucks, right? But it's probably going to be less than a roof. So why would you want me to be here, knowing that there's a million other options, many of which cost nothing? How are you hoping I can help you? And that brings you into the selling conversation. Now, let's talk about the people that have already done business with you, right? They've already done business with what you do. So I use the illustration of a car dealer, right? Somebody who sells cars. Well, there's a good chance I'm 60 years old. If I'm talking to a 60-year-old person, pretty good chance they may have bought a car, I don't know, in the 60 years they've been on the earth. So they already have a relationship. They've already done it once. Maybe they do it frequently. And in an incumbent situation, there's 2 elements in an incumbent situation. Write this down. There's what we call a consistent incumbent and an inconsistent incumbent. Let me give you an example. Okay? I take my shirts to the same dry cleaner. Am I obligated to take my shirts to the same dry cleaner? No, of course not. I can go to any dry cleaner I want. There was a period of time where I went to another dry cleaner that wasn't the one that I go to now. But a consistent incumbent is one that that's an N, by the way. I spell bad, so anybody who's watching, if I write something up here that doesn't even look like what I just said, well, just listen to what I say. Don't look what I write, okay? So a consistent relationship is one that you keep going back to. Your dentist, right? I see people all the time. They say, I broke a tooth. I got to go to my guy. I keep pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off. Why? Because who the hell wants to go to a dentist? And again, but our client dentists are wonderful people and they're painless. You're welcome to call us. We're happy to send them to you. All right. A consistent incumbent relationship is one you always go back to. Now, you can go to any dentist that you want. Why? Because the dentist looks at you based on how you are now. The fact that he saw you 3 years ago has nothing to do with how you present today. The same thing with your doctor, right? The same thing with everybody that you do business with. And yet, we intentionally go back to these consistent relationships. We have the perception that the fact that we've done business with them before and we were happy with the outcome, that would guarantee future results. There is no guarantee of future results. The fact that I've had great success with somebody else, right? The fact that we do great jobs for Cody doesn't mean we're going to do great jobs for Sam. Why? Because people are different. Everybody accepts information differently. So I need to be able to figure out how, in a consistent relationship or an inconsistent. For example, people buy a house on average anywhere between every 5 to 10 years. That's about standard, right? But you generally, most people don't even talk to their real estate agent between the time they closed on their last house and the time they start thinking on a new house. And there's a good chance that you've seen thousands of advertisements and thousands of articles and thousands of newspapers. And if you're here in the Tucson area, thousands of television commercials about other very competent, potentially more competent real estate agents, and yet you go back to that person you haven't talked to in 5 years. Why? Because that's that inconsistent incumbent. You still have that relationship with them because you had it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20, doesn't make any difference. I need to give you a tool that allows you to take this relationship, consistent or inconsistent, by the way, that your client is happy with, probably gave them good pricing, probably gave them good service. probably gave them every reason to go back to them again. And I have to give you some tools on how you kind of create a wedge, how you work into it. John had a great segue line for me. So I want you to write this down. I'm going to slurp my coffee first. Number one tool. And remember how I said it originally? In order for them to marry us, I have to get them to at least psychologically divorce their existing relationship. But if you go to them and say, well, are you happy? You know what they're going to say? Sure, I'm happy. Right? Been working with XYZ company for a long time. Been working with Merrill Lynch. Right? They do a great job. Happy with my guy. Been there for 10 years. Right? Well, if this guy's got $2 million worth of potential business, I'm not going to give that up. I'm like a dog with a bone. But I'm not going to walk in the door and say, Merrill Lynch sucks, which, by the way, they don't. They're our biggest client. We love them. Thank you. Okay? But I'm not going to walk in the door and say that. But I have to figure out a way where I can create that level of dissatisfaction. Because if I go in and say they're terrible, well, that just makes me look bad. We're not going to do that. So I'm going to use a line called nobody's perfect. Write this down. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. And by the way, interestingly enough, draw attention to the fact that I don't talk about me in any of these. All of these incumbent interjection tools, I never talk about myself because at this point in time, they don't give a damn. They don't care about me yet. They care about them. Here's what nobody's perfect sounds like. Right? And by the way, also draw attention to the fact that your incumbent could be no one. It could be no one. It could be they've never worked with somebody like you before. So if Cody's talking to Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and he meets Mr. and Mrs. Jones at a party, and they strike up a conversation, and Mr. and Mrs. Jones says, oh yeah, I've been with UBS for ages, right? I do all my work with Wells Fargo. And you say, well, they're a good organization, right? Wells Fargo's been around longer pretty much than anybody, right? They were like the Pony Express, I think. So they've been around longer with that, so you're not going to go in like, hey, we've been around longer. So here's what I'm going to say. So Mr. and Mrs. Jones, let me ask you a question. Because, by the way, that's a good organization. They really do a good job. But nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. You're not. You're not perfect. If there's one thing that they could be doing better for you, what would that be? And shut up. If there's one thing they could be doing better for you, what would that be? Right? Mr. Grocer, right? You've been working with your pecan provider for a long time. You told them they give you great prices, great delivery, everything. So before I leave, can I ask you a question? By the way, on a role play, when I say before I leave, before I get off the phone, people are honest with you. You know why? Because they think that if they answer you honestly, when I say before I leave, can I ask you a question? What do they think happens on the other side of you answering that question? I leave. Right? I'm not going anywhere. So I'm going to say, so Mr. Grocer, right? You've been working with your pecan provider for a long time, probably give you great pricing, great service, everything. Right? You know, now, I don't know if I can be of help, but can I ask you a question? They're going to say yes. If there was one thing they could be doing better for you, what would that be? And here's the interesting thing about it. He will tell you what they could be doing better, even though they just told you they were happy. And here's what it'll sound like. Well, I wish they were quicker on their delivery. Right? That seems like a reasonable. I was a grocer, right? When I'm low on stock, I want it in quick. Right? I wish they were quicker on their delivery. I'd say, well, tell me more about that. Well, from the time that I call them to the time they can actually come is a week. And normally we only call them when our shelves are basically free. Right? There's basically none there. Now, what would most weak salespeople say when a potential prospect has said something disparaging about the incumbent? What would most weak salespeople say? Most weak salespeople would say, Sam, well, you know what, Mr. Jones, if you buy from us, we're going to have it here so fast. It's going to be amazing. It'll make your head spin. In fact, and I love using this line, by the way, you know, we actually employ psychics. We've got 3 psychics, right? It's like Minority Report with Tom Cruise. They're in our back room, and all they do when they come in is figure it out. So they say, hey, listen, they're going to need to order, so even before you order it, we know you need it, so we're going to call you. That's what most weak salespeople do. But we don't know the depth of their dissatisfaction, right? All they've said at that point in time is, I wish my existing pecan provider would deliver faster. So this is what I'm going to say. Oh, okay. So when you called your existing pecan provider and told them you wanted faster delivery, what did they say? Right? No, are we talking about me? Yeah. What did they say? And Sam, if I ask you the question, when you called your existing pecan provider and told them that you wanted faster delivery, what did they say? Well, they can only say one of two things, right? What would they say? Well, I didn't call him. That could potentially be one, right? And if he didn't call him, that tells you the depth of his dissatisfaction is not that significant. You're probably not going to get in there on that way. Or he can say, what? I called him. I called him. I told him I want faster delivery. And I'm going to say, okay, well, have they delivered faster? And the answer to have they delivered faster is only one of two things. Yes, they have, right? And now we go in a different direction. Or no, they haven't. But see, the beautiful thing about professional selling is I know both sides of the script. No matter what they say, I know the next thing, because I craft my questions very specifically, right? As John was talking about, very specific questions would deal with objection. Most people ask these insignificant questions, and not surprisingly, they get insignificant answers. If you want better answers, ask better questions. So, Mr. Jones, when you told them you were unhappy with the fact that they were so hard in delivering or so slow in delivering, what did they say? Well, they said they would be better. Okay, were they? Well, no, not really. Okay, but that's not going to be enough for you to leave them, is it? And shut up. No, because he could say, well, we've been with them a long time, and they pretty much do everything else okay. Fine, well, I know I'm not going to go that way. But he could also say, well, yeah, if they can't beef up their delivery, we're going to have to find somebody new. And you see how using nobody's perfect went from somebody who was very happy, who said they were happy, now we have an inroad. So, Mr. Jones, if there was a way that I could show you that we could deliver within 48 hours from the time that your order would be placed, would we have something to talk about? No, I didn't tell him about my organic pecan. I didn't tell him about my pecans. I didn't tell him they were locally grown. I haven't told him anything about us. But now I have found something that's potentially an opportunity for me to go in. Nobody's perfect. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. They are not perfect. If there was one thing that they could be doing better for you, what would that be? Another one that I love to use is 125% satisfied. Now, I think people understand that 100% is maximum, right? Right? 100% is it. But when I say 125%, what I'm actually saying is not only are you satisfied, are you super satisfied? So, Mr. Jones, are you 125% sure that your existing pecan provider is doing everything that they can for you in terms of the quality of the product, the delivery, everything? Now, when I say that, you know what I normally hear? Well, no, I don't think it's 125%. Right? And I would say, well, what do you think? And they'll say, well, maybe 70, maybe 80, right? They're not doing everything they probably could be doing. Again, this is an opportunity for me to get a wedge into there. And I'm not doing it, by the way, about saying anything disparaging. You'll notice I have not said one disparaging thing. And there, nobody's perfect. I haven't said anything disparaging on 125%. I haven't seen anything disparaging at all. But my goal ultimately is to be able to create a level of dissatisfaction between what their existing relationship with and what a potential relationship would be. Let's go over to Cody again for another one. Cody does financial services. Now, in my world, my financial services people, I meet with, preferably face-to-face, if not for a very prolonged, elongated telephone conversation every quarter. I believe, now, depending on the circumstances and volatility of your market and your world, it may be more, it may be less, but I believe in the financial services, you should have a meaningful conversation at least every quarter. Is that an unreasonable statement? Nope, exactly. So, if Cody is talking to someone else who maybe has a relationship, right? They already have a relationship with an existing provider. And since Cody is very good at what he does and believes on a quarterly basis he should have a meaningful conversation with his client, I believe that it's okay for Cody to say this. So, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, when you meet with your existing provider every 3 months to talk about strategies and plans and such like that, how does that conversation go? I have hundreds of financial planning clients. And do you know what happens when they say that to a prospect? Or to someone who has an existing relationship with another financial planner? You know what they say? Well, we don't meet with our people on a quarterly basis. And then Cody, being smart, says, well, at least you meet with them a couple times a year then. And here's what we normally hear. No. Twice a year? No. Once a year? No, not really. Ever? No, I can't think of anything. Now, what have I now done? Because when I said initially, so when you meet with your financial planner for your quarterly meeting, what did you guys talk about? Now what have I instilled in that person's mind that every other person in the world who's a competent and capable financial planner does? You want to take a stab, Tony?
They meet every quarter.
They meet every quarter. Great. See, isn't it great? I mean, it's so easy, this stuff. You know what it comes out to. And now here's what I'm creating that level of dissatisfaction. And now Mr. and Mrs. Jones are looking at each other going, well, should we have been meeting every quarter? You know, could we have made more money? Right? Could we have saved money on taxes if we did that? Now, I didn't say they were bad. I didn't say anything. I said, when you met every quarter. Now, you can do this however you want, right? When you did your monthly meeting with your grocery providers to talk about ways that you can improve the relationship, how did that go? And know what the grocer's going to say? I never meet with our people. But what now is the grocer thinking in the back of their mind? Well, wow, if I was meeting with my people, how much better would I be? How much better would my products be? How much better would my pricing be? How much better would everything be? So when you had your roofer come out for your yearly complimentary review, when they were here last time, did they notice anything? Mitch, do you want to take the rest of this?
Just get them to express their dissatisfaction.
Absolutely, because what are Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner going to say? Well, our last roofer never came out ever. He did the work 2-3 years ago, and the roof started leaking right away. But we keep forgetting to call him, or if the leak is too small. Right? Or it only happens here when we have our monsoons in Tucson, because the rest of the year, it's hot and sunny. And water leak isn't a problem. But what are they now thinking? Wow, the existing guy that I had before probably wasn't very good because he never came back.
Didn't live up to their expectations.
But they didn't have any expectations. So I'm giving them expectations now. So when you call them in the future and you say, Mrs. Jones, it's time for your yearly roof evaluation. Because that's what all the professional people do. And do you think when you go to Mrs. Jones' house and you go up in their attic, you just might find something? Now, I'm not saying you're looking for work. You're legitimately looking to make sure your repairs were done effectively. But do you think you could potentially find new business opportunities?
Absolutely.
Need I say more? But that doesn't mean you're doing it disingenuously. That doesn't mean you're providing good customer service with the hope of getting more business out of it. That leak, that next section that's going to leak that you had nothing to do with and didn't repair was going to leak whether or not you showed up or not.
I love to know that I'm going to give them a phone call after I inspect their roof while I'm on their roof.
I'll take that.
Come knock on your
Sure,
door.
but
Here's a plan.
But listen to the expectation we're creating. So Mrs. Jones, when your previous roof repair person came out for his yearly inspection, what did he find? And they're going to say, well, he didn't come out for his yearly inspection, right? Oh, so his company does like 24 months every 2 years. Well, no. Did he ever come out? Well, no. But now what is Mrs. Jones thinking? Well, he must not be very professional because he should have come out every year, or at least every other year. When you're dealing with an incumbent, it is critical that, again, before they can marry you, they have to psychologically divorce whatever their existing relationship with. Could be an actual company, or it could potentially be doing it themselves, not having anybody at all. Let's keep moving on, because I want to make sure that we get everything that we want to get on the agenda here. All right? You want to have a second opinion. You want to have a plan B. All right? Second opinion. Second opinion. I love to ask this question. And when I'm in front of large groups of people, well, here's what I like to ask them. Does anybody here have a doctor that they love and they trust? And inevitably, you'll have lots of people put their hand up. Oh, yeah, I've been working with Dr. Jones for 30 years, delivered my kids, you know, helped my dad through cancer, great guy, we absolutely love him. I said, really, that's great, because most people don't have that relationship. Let me ask you a question. You go into Dr. Jones' office today, and he says, listen, I saw some things I didn't like on your scan. And you say, well, what is it, Dr. Jones? And you say, well, I think you have lung cancer. And I think you have a rather advanced case of lung cancer. And you say, well, Dr. Jones, how much time do I have? And Dr. Jones says, I think you probably got about 30 to 60 days. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to go home and say, honey, that's it, I'm dead. That's it, 2 months, I'm gone. I'm done, I'm finished, there's nothing I can do. You know, I'm going to kiss the kids, and that's it, in 2 months, I'm gone. What are you going to do? What are you likely going to get? A second. But you love Dr. Jones. Right? He delivered your kids. Right? He helped your dad through cancer. He could certainly get you through cancer. And yet you're going to get what? A second opinion. Even from somebody that you love. So when I walk in and say, look, everybody that you're dealing with might be great. But you know what they are? They're human. They're human. Right? There was a period of time where the medical science thought bloodletting. Bloodletting. That was it. The greatest minds in science said, you know what? You got too much bad blood, we got to get rid of some of it.
We need some leeches.
We need some leeches. Yeah, bring out the leeches. Right? You know, during the Civil War, you know more people died in the Civil War because of mercury than anything else? Mercury and lead poisoning. Because they were convinced that mercury and lead was the right things to use. There was a period of time when the greatest scientific minds were convinced that the world was flat. These are the greatest scientific minds in the world. Greatest science. World's flat, that's it. Right? We got our calculations. Here's the stars, right? It's flat. Go to the edge. Watch out for the dragons on the way. It's going to be a period of time, 50 years in the future. You know what they're going to say? You actually took a needle and it penetrated your skin. What were you guys, heathens? That's barbaric. Be like Star Trek, right? Right? Nobody ever felt it. No. You have to create the level of dissatisfaction between what their existing relationship is and potentially what you can provide. That's why. Second opinion. So Mrs. Jones. O-P-I-N-I-O. I think that says opinion. All right, so Mrs. Jones, you're probably right. Right? The people that you had out, it probably is going to be $10,000 for your new roof. Probably will be. Right? But here's what I don't know. I haven't been on your roof. I'll happily go out, take a look. If I can help you and I think I can do something, I will. If I don't think I can, I'm going to say I can't, and that's it. Are you okay with that? Second opinion, plan B. Bob, you might be very, very happy with the people that you're dealing with. And they probably, and by the way, they're probably doing a good job. A lot of people bring me in because they don't know what they don't know. Just another set of eyes. I've used that example about the doctor 500 times with people. Because I've had people say, oh, we're already working with a trainer. I'd be like, really? Okay. Can I ask you a question? And I give them my job, Dr. Jones. And you know what I hear in the background? You're probably right. Because they don't know what they don't know. That doesn't mean that Dr. Jones is bad. Doesn't mean that their existing financial planner is bad. Doesn't mean the guy who did their roof originally was bad. Doesn't mean that the pecan guy they're working with now sucks. No. It just means they don't know what they don't know. You got to keep, again, keeping an eye on the incumbent. You want to be able to create a level of dissatisfaction. The rest of these are going to go fast when we get out of time. All right? Here's one I do like. And it really goes with the 125%. So if it's 125%, and if I'm asking now, are you 125% satisfied? Here's what I like to say. You know, because I believe that everything is desire, not necessarily, you know, or excuse me, capacity, not desire. And I believe if people knew how to help you, they would. Right? So if I have a person I'm working with as a financial planner, and they lost money last year, right? More than anything, what does a good financial planner not want to do for his clients? Lose money. You think, right? A good financial planner does not want to lose money for his clients. A good roofer does not want a leaky roof after he fixes it, right? A good person that provides any kind of food or nutrition products or anything wants to bring the best possible product to the marketplace. So the person who's a financial planner, and despite his best efforts, his client still loses money. Well, that's an issue of capacity, not desire, because more than anything, what do they want to do? They want their clients to make money. So if their clients aren't making money, it's not an issue of desire, because of course they want to do that. It's an issue of what? Capacity. Because if they knew how to do it, they'd already be doing it. If they knew how to fix their roof, they'd already be doing it. If they knew how to grow wonderful products, if they knew how to do it, they'd already be doing it. If the doctor that knew how to cure this, or the dentist that could fix this, if they knew how to do it, they'd already be doing it. So if your person is losing you money, it's not a desire. More than anything, they want to have you make more money. It's capacity. They don't know how. They don't know how to fix their roof. They don't know how to fix this. They don't know how to do this. They don't know how to do this. It's an issue of capacity. Now, when I say that, and I say that just that way, because here's what I hear a lot of times. Well, we already have a sales manager. Right? And I'd say, okay, are you making more money? They're like, well, no. We actually lost money last year. Let me ask you a question. More than anything, what do you think your sales manager wanted you to do? Lose money or make money? And he says, well, he wanted to make money. I said, well, he didn't make money. So it's not desire, because what? He wants to make money. It's an issue of what? Capacity. Because if he knew how to help you make more money, and again, regardless of the marketplace, we live in an incredibly intolerant world nowadays. Just open the paper, listen to the news. When you go to your boss and say, well, listen, boss, I'm not going to make my quota because gas is high and it's hard, and Putin's in Ukraine, and inflation, and I don't like it, and Supreme Court, and yeah, I'm not going to make my quota this year. What do you think your boss is going to say? Oh, you're right, don't worry about it, the world sucks. The world's like, no, you don't make your quota, you're out, period. We live in an intolerant world. We eat what we kill. I kill a lot. I eat a lot. That's good. I hope everybody thinks like that. Your life will be much, much, much better. Doesn't mean you steal. Doesn't mean you take advantage of it. But when you understand the incumbent techniques, and you understand that the entire world is one of two things. Either they have not purchased what you do, or they have purchased what you do. And I want to make sure if they have purchased what I do, that they're going to buy it from me next time. I believe that I can have an unlimited amount of satisfied clients. Many people don't. Many people think I can only make 10 people happy. Nope, that's not the case. If you always do what you always, let's say, write this down. If you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always got. I'll say it again. If you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always got. Now that has a certain kind of a lyrical sing-song quality to it, doesn't it? If you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always got. And when you think about that, if you look at everything in your life, if you're driving the same car that you drove 5 years ago, unless it's a really super kick-ass car, if you're wearing the same clothes, if you're living in the same, and by the way, I'm not saying that any of these things are bad. I want to make that distinction right off the bat. I am not saying anything of these things is bad. What I am saying is that success in sales gives you choices. You can choose what you do. Choices are not made for you. Unfortunately, with limited resources, you now have choices taken away. You may want to take the family to Europe, and if you just won a $100 million lottery, I guarantee Europe would be slotted in as an option for your plans. Right? If you didn't win the $100 million lottery and you're struggling to make a car payment, I guarantee the trip 50 miles away is probably the short list. If you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always got. So I want you to expand what you are doing. We talk about, when you restart the year and looking at everything and trying to figure out what to change. But your incumbent, your understanding that everybody in the world falls into one or two categories, and how you start the categories will dictate your success in those relationships. So we have 5 minutes left. I'm going to do something we haven't already done. I'm going to go around the room real quickly. Oh, come on, John. Cody, what'd you get from today? And by the way, thank you all for playing. This is our first initial time being back here at the Catalyst, so we're kind of doing a soft opening today. Cody, what'd you get?
I really got some great insights into.
It's all pretty fast, isn't it?
No, it really is. It
I
really
know.
is. Especially, nobody's perfect.
Right.
Especially when in my industry,
Right.
you run into people who've never met somebody, or they have. And the big differences in it is they're either satisfied with who they have, or they hated the last person they interacted with.
Absolutely, sure. And then you inherit it. So if it's like, if your last plumber was a drunk, every plumber is a drunk. If this last guy was a crook, every person is a crook. And I hear that all the time. But the thing is that when depending on how you go into it, dictates, because when you try to sell this person, when you try to sell them, again, because why? The incumbent is them. It's him and his wife, right? So if you try to sell this person, what they hear is, Cody thinks I'm an idiot and I can't handle my own money. Because that's what they hear. Because you're saying, oh my God, if you were with me, you would have had twice the returns and saved half in taxes. And not surprisingly, you're kind of by de facto calling this guy an idiot. Not surprisingly, he's not going to want to do business. That's why, what do we say, John? I say yes to everything. Doesn't mean I buy everything, but I say yes to everything. I hope you sell me. Why? Because I would only buy if it's an improvement over what I have now. Every person you meet should sit down with you. What's the worst case scenario? They invest a half hour of their time, and either you're going to determine what they're doing is good, all right, they're positive, right, or that you in fact could help them. So that's a great takeaway. Thoughts on that, John? Or go, Mitch.
With John, I think it was, talking about the aspects of how we can help each other, and not forgetting that, and going over them and reiterating
Absolutely,
that
sure.
at the end of the conversation, set up for, the follow-up and what are those parameters, and then, with Don.
Once you engage with somebody, then you have to really understand that keeping that engagement going is your responsibility.
Absolutely.
And it's your job to make sure that all the things that we agreed upon are going to be, because you become kind of like the referee kind of a deal. And if you don't take that role, then all of a sudden you're going to have
Just in case.
You're going to have a situation whereby you'll get what we call drift. Your prospects, your conversation will just drift away, and so, yeah, or leakage, drift, however you want to say it, but that's exactly right.
Sure.
Can I ask you a question? I was just wondering about how would you suggest saying the words, how can we help each other? Is that going too far? Because you're describing that, hey, we could have an amicable relationship.
I generally say, what do you think we should do next? With my hands in literally like this. Like, what do you want to do next?
Right.
How we can help each other is more of a networking thing. It's more of a first introduction. Like, you're a roofer and I'm a stucco dude. How can we help? Or a solar dude.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how can we help each other type of stuff. Once you start to get into the sales funnel, then his language is a little more apropos.
Well, what I find is if I say, well, Mrs. Jones, I think we should do blah, 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 right? She now needs to decide. And she can say yes or she can say no. When I say, Mrs. Jones, what do you think we should do next? And she says, I think we should do this. I have never, ever had a situation when Mrs. Jones says, well, could we get together and meet with my husband? And I say, that's a great idea. When would your husband be available? And Mrs. Jones goes, oh, no, I don't want you to meet with my husband. They never say that. When you say, what do you want to do next? Right, because I have an unlimited time to sell you. I align my time to sell you with your time to buy. Some people buy in a week. Some people buy in a month. Some people buy in a year. That's okay. I want your money in a week, a month, and a year. I align my time to sell you. And we kiddingly say a good salesperson is like a bad rash. We never fully go away. Now, all that essentially means is that we drip market to them. So every month or so, they get something, an email, a call, a follow-up, a letter, something, right? We never fully go away, so we're always top of mind. So when their circumstance aligns, right? Cody's talking to somebody for 2 years, and nothing comes of it, and then Aunt Molly dies and leaves him $1 million. Well, if he's talking to her every month, what does she now think of him in terms of character? And he's like, he wasn't trying to sell me, he wasn't trying to take me, never asked me for any money. Now I got $1 million, I gotta go someplace, right? I'm going to go to the guy who didn't pressure me. So, that's what I say. What should we do next? And whatever they tell you.
One of the things also that when we talked about the eight things to avoid, and one of them was understanding the mood or the pace of the meeting, leapfrog that to the mood and the pace of the process. So to Don's point, some deals go off in a matter of a week, some deals take 6 months. You have to, it's not a meeting, but it is an understanding of
It's a touch.
of what you're doing. So you gotta be reflective of the mood and the pace of the process.
Now, if you do know what the legitimate process takes, tell them, right? So I'll go back to Cody. So you can say, so Mr. and Mrs. Jones, let me share with you what, the process that we go through so you can kind of have an expectation, right? Generally, we're gonna meet 4 times, right? The first time we meet, we're gonna do blobbity, blobbity, blobbity. Then, you'll ask questions, I'll ask questions, we'll meet again. We'll do blobbity, 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 right? We'll kind of hone down a little bit. We'll meet the 3rd time. We'll put together a plan. Again, I'm inventing a lot of this stuff, so, right? And then we get together at the 4th meeting, we can decide whether or not it makes sense to work together. That's it. That's the plan. We do this and this and this and this. And it's interesting because most people get afraid when they don't know what the process is. Your natural fear of the unknown is worse in many cases than people feel like they're going to be. That's why when I tell people, I say yes to everything. So when I meet with somebody, I'm like, look, you understand, I want you to sell me. I want you to have a better deal than whatever it is that I have right now. So I'm on your side. You just have to show me how what you have is better than this, and I'm in. And when I say that to people, it's like I showed them fire for the first time. It goes, I've never ever met with somebody who ever said that. And that's why I get the best of everything, because I ask everybody for the same thing. But what do you think we should do next? Well, I think you should come back. I think you should give me a quote. I think you should do this. Okay. Because whatever you ask next is what they want. They'll tell you, as opposed to what we're going to impress upon them. So, Sam, you have last word, my friend. What'd you get from today?
The one thing was the make sure you follow up.
Yeah, that's huge. People do such a great job of opening the door, and then they just neglect it and let it languish. They really do. That's why one of the lines, so when you met, and we're all guilty of this, by the way, I'm guilty. Right? We bust our ass, we meet somebody at a networking thing, we bust our ass to sell them, we get them to sign the dotted line, and we just neglect them. That's why, and I got people that have millions of dollars in financial, tens of millions of dollars in one case, in financial services, that I had a client bring tens of millions of dollars over because of that one line. So when you met, quarterly with your existing people, what do you guys talk about? And when he said, literally, it was like you could just see the awareness coming out. He was like, we don't meet every quarter, and it was beautiful because I was in the room, right? And it was like, well, a couple times a year. No. Twice a year? No. Now keep in mind, this guy's got, in this case, about $15 million that he has invested with somebody else. And you know what he's thinking? What the hell? Yeah, I should be talking to somebody every quarter. Yeah, I should be doing this. How come they didn't call? And he actually said, he goes, well, how come they didn't? How come I don't quarter me? No. Right? Right then and there, that's a perfect example. The guy said, how do I get my money over to you? Right? Just like that. Because if you think about it, that's what he wanted. He wanted to know he was in good hands. Right? So that's when I make the statement, right? Are you 100% positive they're doing everything they can to take care of your, $10 million plus dollars? And the answer was no, they weren't. Why? Because I don't talk to them ever. Right? If there's a problem, if I call them with a problem, they take care of the problem. They're nice about it. But they're not proactive. They're never talking about, hey, we should consider this, and hey, this is happening in the world, and let's strategize, and blah, blah, blah. They didn't do any of that. They just neglected them. They busted their ass. They flew them in a private jet to New York, to Manhattan, to their main office, to wine and dine this guy. They wine and dine him. They take his $10 million plus, and they neglect him. And here's what they say. Oh, yeah, you get the newsletter, right? hey, kiss my ass for the newsletter, right? I want somebody in front of me pouring my coffee telling me that you're doing everything you can with my money. So, sorry, I didn't mean to be vulgar there. So, thank you, Sam. But so what do you think of the
Sam,
session?
one of the things I
Yeah.
wanted to say, one of the things that can help everybody stay in a follow-up mode is just embrace the mantra.
I knew I was going to spill my coffee.
Well, at least it was on one of your.
Yeah, exactly.
Lesser stellar time.
Yeah, exactly.
So, one of the things,
Like a 4-year-old.
one of the things that you can do to help yourself follow up is just kind of create the mantra and put it to the only song, your song in your mind is treat your prospects like customers and treat your customers like prospects. And if you constantly remind yourself of that, follow-up just starts to flow with you.
Which means essentially you treat your prospects with the casual, relaxed relationship you have with longtime customers that you've grown to love. But you treat your customers like prospects because you have to earn their business every day. You know, the fact that, you know, you went to your dentist 2 years ago, there's no obligation for you to go back to them. And yet, most people are fine with it. Anyways, we went past out of time. Thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate you joining us again. We know that there's so many things vying for your time out there in the world. I am Don Zavis, National Sales Trainer.
I'm John Wechter, business coach, sales trainer, and
We wish you good selling. Bye-bye, everybody. Woo!